This week, we are going to be looking at the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment was a time of great change where new views and ideas were born. One of the most important ideas was secularism. Secularism is the idea that religion and government should be separate, which was the first time in history that it was suggested. The church has always had some form of influence on the government, which is why the idea seemed revolutionary at the time. This idea of secularism came from the notion that natural science and reason could explain all aspects of life. People also began to believe in the potential of man, separating their intellect from God. Another important idea of the Enlightenment was Deism. This was the part of the Enlightenment that focused solely on religion. The basic belief of Deism was that God created the world like a cosmic clockmaker and left it to run by itself. Therefore, the universe was governed by natural law as opposed to a personal God. That's why it is believed that nothing supernatural is involved with human life. The idea of natural law came from Newton, which is what deism is centered around. The scientific revolution had a large impact on the Enlightenment. The ideas of human society and institutions carried over into the Enlightenment. There was another emphasis on natural laws and their role in society. Education was also carried on as it was believed to be what would help society progress. A thinker from the revolution was Baruch Spinoza, who equated God and nature in his works. There were people who made up the ideas of the Enlightenment, and those were philosophers. One of the most important of them all was John Locke. He wrote a piece named Two Treatises of Civil Government, which defended the Glorious Revolution in England. He also believed that humans should be in a state of nature where they were good but lacked protection. His idea contrasted with Hobbes' own view. Another important idea of his was that the government and people had a social contract. In this contract, the government would protect the people's natural rights, life, liberty, and property, in exchange for the consent to be governed. He also advocated for the right to rebellion, which allowed the people to abolish any government that did not protect their natural rights. He also wrote an essay concerning human understanding, where he stated that a person's environment was the most important factor in their thinking. He rejected the idea that all people were born with their ideals. The term for this is tabula rasa. One of the main demands of the Enlightenment was religious toleration. Thinkers often wrote about the need for it. This can be seen in Bernard de Fontenelle and Pierre Bayle. Pierre, in particular, wanted not only religious toleration, but the complete toleration of all ideas. He believed that people should be free to worship any religion or none at all. He also believed in the idea that religion and morality were not necessarily linked. Both thinkers, in accordance with believing people should have the freedom to choose their religion, tried to make the Enlightenment accessible to the public. Now, on to the philosophers. They were the most important thinkers of the Enlightenment. Of these philosophers, there was Voltaire. He wrote his pieces with a sharp sarcasm and ridiculed those with whom he disagreed. He had strong deist views and believed in natural law, as well as human reason. He believed that these two things would progress society and not religious faith. He also spoke out against bigotry, injustice, and called for religious toleration. Those who advocated against religious toleration, he said, crush the infamous thing. These ideas would inspire and set the stage for the French Revolution. Not only did it inspire the French Revolution, but it also inspired monarchs such as Catherine the Great of Russia, Joseph II of Austria, and Napoleon of France. Another philosopher was Baron de Montesquieu. He was entirely against absolutism from Louis XIV. He wrote Spirit of the Laws, which called for one of his main ideas, separation of power in government. He preached for the government to be separated into three branches: monarchy, nobility, and the rest of the population. This would prevent tyranny and promote liberty. In order to make sure that there is order between these branches, he proposed the idea of checks and balances, where one branch would not have more power than another. His ideas would influence not only the French Revolution, but also the US Constitution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a philosopher, and just like John Locke, he believed in the idea of a social contract. Along with the social contract came his idea of the general will, where consensus majority would control the nation, implying democracy. General will was too vague, which caused many rulers to later use it in support of their tyranny. Another one of his important beliefs was that man in a state of nature was a noble savage. This meant that at heart they were good, but only became corrupted by the materialism of civilization. One of his pieces, Emile, was written in support of progressive education, where he preached learning by doing and self-expression. However, he did argue against equality for women in society and education. He also actively attacked rationalism and civilization, saying that it destroyed rather than liberated the individual. Denis Diderot was the person who made the encyclopedia. It was one of the greatest works of all the philosophers, as it was composed of political and social critiques from many different Enlightenment philosophers and authors. This helped in spreading their ideas to the general public. Some of the included contents were support for science and reason, while criticizing religion, intolerance, injustice, and tyranny. It was even banned in some places, such as France. Marquis de Beccaria wrote a piece named On Crimes and Punishment. He was important because he sought to humanize criminal law based on Enlightenment concepts of reason and equality before the law. He wanted punishment to be based on how big of a detriment that action was to society, and not based on sin. He advocated against the death penalty and did not like torture at all. Some enlightened monarchs took after his ideas and used them in their kingdoms. Economics were changed during the Enlightenment as well. One of the philosophers was Francois Quesnay, who was a part of the physiocrats. This group of people believed in the idea of free trade, where the government would not regulate trade. Later, Adam Smith would adopt and expand upon the idea of free trade. He wrote The Wealth of Nations, where he talked about supply and demand, competition between companies, and the invisible hand. He stated that government regulation would only interfere with these important ideas. Women were prominent during the Enlightenment. This can be seen in the Saloon Movement. Women such as Madame de Geoffrin, Madame de Staël, and Louise de Warens would host events in saloons where many of the brightest minds of the Enlightenment would gather and discuss major issues of the day. The Saloon Movement was a new form in which people could share information. This sharing of information was also done in places such as coffee houses, academies, and libraries. The opinion on women's equal rights was split amongst the population. This can be seen in Rousseau and Marquis de Condorcet. Rousseau believed that women were not only socially inferior, but also genetically. They were weaker and had different temperaments, which he said was the reason why they should not be educated like men. Condorcet, on the other hand, supported women, even going as far as to say that they should have suffrage. Women such as Mary Wollstonecraft fought for their own rights. She wrote pieces such as The Vindication of the Rights of Women, which attacked Rousseau in his view that women should not receive education. Another woman who wrote for her own freedom was Olympe de Gouges. She wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen. In this piece, she demanded that French women be given the same rights as men during the French Revolution. She also advocated for equality in marriage. Eventually, however, she was killed for her criticism on the French revolutionary government. Later Enlightenment. This was during the late 18th century. During this time, philosophers were becoming more skeptical while continuing to demand religious toleration. Baron Paul de Holzbach was one of these people. He wrote System of Nature, which said that humans were like machines because they are determined by outside forces. However, his ideas were not all good. His staunch on atheism, determinism, and attacks on Christianity undermined the Enlightenment. Another person of the late Enlightenment was David Hume. He argued against faith in both natural law and religion. He also said that desire was what governed human behavior as opposed to reason. Marquis de Condorcet was also a part of this time period. He wrote Progress of the Human Mind, where he talked about a utopian society. These ideas undermined the Enlightenment, however. Lastly, there was Immanuel Kant, who separated science and morality into different branches of knowledge. He said that science could describe nature, but could not provide a guide for morality. Classical liberalism. This was the political outgrowth of the Enlightenment. The belief was that individuals should have liberty and equality under the law. However, this did not translate into democracy. Classical liberalism also stressed natural rights, the general will, and laissez-faire.